Hello, everyone. This is Adam Fishman, the Executive Director of American Friends of Likud, and I want to welcome you all once again to our next edition of AFL's Insider Briefing. And today we are very fortunate to have with us a very close friend of American Friends of Likud for many, many years, and that is the mayor of Efrat, Oded Revivi. You've seen Oded Revivi's bio in the invite that you received. And one of the things that I think is important to recognize is that he is a reservist as a lieutenant colonel in the tank brigades, and highly touted as such. Received accommodations, and so your perspective on unfortunately on war and insights is something that we value very, very highly. One of the questions that we've received as the war continues here, going into its fifth week, sadly we continue to lose soldiers each day. People have seemed to have. Some people, not our people, but this is a very sophisticated group. Some people have already seemed to have forgotten that we lost more than 300 out of the 1,400 people that were slaughtered on that first day. We lost quite a few soldiers. And yet every day we wake up to hear that another soldier, sadly and tragically, was killed in the fighting to eliminate and eradicate Hamas in Gaza. But the question that keeps coming up, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to reach out to you today, Oded, is as the mayor of Efrat in Yehuda and Shomron in Judea and Samaria, there's concern about the tensions that are rising. Efrat is a place, a city that is open around all of its borders. It is not a closed city. It does not have a fence around it. You don't have to go through a gate to get into it. And it's one of the things that you pride yourselves on over the years, or have prided yourselves on, is the relationships with the neighboring Arabs, who, as you yourself have stated, celebrated the brutal attacks of October 7th. So with that as a bit of a harsh introduction, I guess I'll turn it over to you just to get your thoughts and insights, and we'll get to the Q&A afterwards. Take your time. Tell us what it is that's going on over there. I will just remind everyone to please use the Q&A on your screen if you want to ask a brief question. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Oded, I turn it over to you.
Excellent. So thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity. I would try and be as short and concise as possible so we can fit in as many questions as possible. So just forward your questions to Adam and I'll try and address all of them. The 7th of October has hit everybody by surprise, not just by the timing of the attack, but also by the severity of the attack, the amount of terrorists crossing the border, and the brutality of what they did to the people they attacked, abducted, taken as prisoners or as hostages. If you're referring to what's happening in Judea and Samaria and to Efrat in particular, the attack definitely caused a complete change of understanding of what is the potential of a threat and what needs to be done in response. So you have mentioned that Efrat is a community which is not surrounded by a fence, and we are proud of it. But the truth of the matter is that I actually had a lecture which I used to give very frequently about fences creating a sense of security and not actually providing security. And my lecture, in a nutshell, used to be very brief, that we built a fence in order to stop the terrorists crossing over. In response, we got missiles flying over the fence. We came to the United States, collected money from some good friends from the administration, invented this imaginary technology called Iron Dome, and we've managed to raise the fence to an endless height, catching missiles at any time, at any speed, at any height. We were successful, so they started digging tunnels, and we came again to the States and collected some more funds and invented this new imaginary technology, which we can identify tunnels before the people even think about digging the tunnels. And then we used to be attacked by balloons and kites, and we're completely speechless as to how we can defend our country when we have these enormous, amazing technologies and are being attacked with these youth games of balloons and kites. And what I missed in my chapter in the lecture, and unfortunately this is what happened in Simchat Torah, the sense of security became so strong that Israel also diluted the amount of troops on the ground to stop and prevent any attack if, God forbid, something would happen. And basically what happened in Simchat Torah is that the terrorists just cut through the fence with absolutely no obstacle, eliminating the cameras, eliminating the girls who were sitting in observation headquarters, and just crossed the borders with thousands of terrorists, and there wasn't enough manpower to stop them. And Adam, when you mentioned the first 300 soldiers killed on the first day in battle, they were just outnumbered. They were one soldier against 10, 100, 200 terrorists crossing over, and that was a mission impossible, and that's why so many of them fell in battle, in heroic battles. As time goes by, we learn more about their efforts to stop this brutal enemy, but as I said, they were outnumbered. When we talk about Yehuda v'Shomron and the levels of fear, not just in Yehuda v'Shomron, all over the country, have reached a peak that nobody has ever anticipated in Israel. I had words with the mayor of Bat Yam yesterday, who is confronting, dealing with residents that are afraid that Bat Yam will be conquered from the sea by terrorists coming over and invading through the sea. Now, you know where Bat Yam is. It's south of Tel Aviv. It's definitely not close to the front line, but the people of Israel, seeing the pictures from Gaza, are in a very high level of fear everywhere, not just in Yehuda v'Shomron. I'm saying already the third time when we're talking about Yehuda v'Shomron, so now I'll get to Yehuda v'Shomron. The situation is way more complex, because we know that every single town and city in Yehuda v'Shomron has proximity to Arab villages, which definitely makes it a very scary scenario. And what all of us mayors in Yehuda v'Shomron are dealing with is residents who've seen the horrific pictures from what happened in the Gaza Strip and say, how can you guarantee us that such a scenario won't happen here in Efrat or in Adam in Neve Daniel or any place else you want to choose in Judea and Samaria? And it doesn't matter if these places are surrounded by a fence or not, because we know that the fences can be cut in a second. It doesn't matter if they've got a sophisticated camera system like we have in Efrat, because basically in the Gaza Strip they eliminated the camera system. And that question is definitely on the table. It's raising a lot of questions from the residents. I will add on another element that you have to understand that we're challenging with. We are now at the first week of November, but on the 31st of October, there should have been elections for local authorities in Israel. For the first time since the Yom Kippur War, the elections have been postponed at the moment to the 30th of January because the situation didn't allow for elections to happen. So a lot of the mayors, including myself, have to handle this security challenge when we're also in a political campaign. And you see opponents taking advantage of it, trying to come up with all sorts of scary scenarios, which you can't brush off because they say to you, this is what happened in Gaza Strip. But obviously, at the moment, there isn't good answers for all these questions. I've come to you now from a meeting with the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant. They are aware of the situation in Yehuda v'Shomron. They're working on finding solutions. It will take time. It will take funding. Everybody understands that there needs to be a shift of understanding how we protect the Jews who live in Judea and Samaria. And tomorrow we're having a meeting with the Prime Minister, so I guess we'll discuss that further. But at the moment, everybody is focused on the main efforts, destroying Hamas in the south. Don't know how to phrase it. Trying to prevent Hezbollah going into battle in the north, because we're in somewhat dispute whether we want Hezbollah to go into battle or not. Because some people say we need to take advantage of the situation and we can't ignore what has been built up in the north. On the other hand, as long as Hezbollah keeps the conflict on a low fire, Israel will have a problem to start another front over there. But that's basically, I think, Adam, I've touched all your points, unless I've missed anything.
So I really want to touch on a couple of things. I mean, obviously, like you said, Bat Yam is while they're on the coast, they're not near the front. They are experiencing all kinds of sirens nonstop every time. The amazing ability of Hamas to continually and continuously fire rockets, that for some reason doesn't seem to be abating somewhat. But Efrat and other places in Yehuda and Shomron and Judea and Samaria, like you said, are surrounded. So what sort of, while Bat Yam has the Iron Dome, Gush Etzion has not had or experienced quite as many rocket alerts and sirens. What sort of security measures have the mayors of Yehuda and Shomron and those communities such as Efrat taken to quell the fears of their citizens?
So first of all, to be more accurate, some of the cities in Yehuda and Shomron did have direct hits. Har Adar got hit directly. Alfei Menashe got hit directly. In Efrat, we had sirens blowing out 4 times. On 2 occasions, there were actually missiles which were stopped by Iron Dome, but the shells did fall in our region, creating a big cloud of dust that people thought that there was actually a missile that fell in this region. On the first day, on the 7th of October, shells fell down in our region, and ironically enough, actually injured seriously a young boy, 7-year-old, from a nearby Palestinian village, which is just showing you how the situation is complex. And sure enough, last weekend, they actually approached us to try and assist them evacuating this young boy who's 7 years old to a hospital in Jerusalem because he needed to have some surgery that they couldn't do in Bethlehem. So that is all in the background of what you mentioned, missiles. I would say that today, with the accuracy and effectiveness of Iron Dome, missiles are less scary in Israel. The major fear is tens, if not hundreds, of Arabs coming and conquering a city. It can be the city of Afula, it can be Bat Yam, it can be in Efrat, and the mayors are confronted with the question, what do you do? So all the cities all over Israel set up first response units, something that we in Judea and Samaria had for a very long period of time. And here we're actually more advanced than what maybe the city of Afula is, the city of Bat Yam. In Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, they didn't have first response groups. All these cities, the mayors have set in the last month first response groups. The army, the police are providing rifles for these first response groups, and that's what's happening in the rest of Israel. In Judea and Samaria, we had these first response groups. One of the problems that we were facing was that a lot of the people in the first response unit were actually recruited on reserve duty. So if I had 46 combat fighters in the first response group, 80% of them were actually called up for military service. They were replaced by reservists that the army supplied, but obviously they're not as trained as the ones that we had here. They don't know the area as well as the ones that we had here, and we trained them. And there's lack of experience that we're trying to bridge. We've put roadblocks at the entrance to all the cities. It looks like you're coming into a military base. You have to slow down. You have to go through a narrow passage in order to reach the gate. If in the gate we used to have 1 person, now we have between 2 to 4, depending on the hours. We put at the front gates machine guns in order to prevent a big mass of attackers to come through, because we understand that people with handguns are not effective enough to stop these protesters or terrorists, that should be more accurate. In Efrat, we used to have 2 patrol cars 24/7. Now we're having 8 patrol cars 24/7. I haven't even started mentioning the cost of all this operation. Nobody's talking at the moment about money. The government, as I said, is focused in the battle in the south. They have no attendance to needs of the local authorities all over Israel, not just in Judea and Samaria. And because we're also in a political campaign, I can't allow myself not providing these initiatives because of financial issues. So there's also a financial burden here, which is starting to build up on all the cities around the country.
Now, Efrat specifically, because we mentioned this before, without a fence around it, and the idea of having good relations, whatever that possibly could have meant in the past, with your neighbors. You actually had dialogue. I mean, you had productive, what you felt was productive dialogue with, I don't know if they're the mayors or the heads of the villages or towns, the Arab towns that are surrounding Efrat. Are you in contact with any of those individuals?
So again, ironically enough, 2 days before the attack, during Chol HaMoed Sukkot, in my house, we had the annual meeting of Palestinian leaders with the commander of the Central District, the General Fuchs, who was there present with other army officers and police officers. And to say that that happened 2 days before the attack sounds a bit unrealistic, but that's what happened in my house 2 days before the 7th of October. Since the 7th of October in Judea and Samaria, we've had a surprising surprise by the fact that there's almost no terrorist attacks. There are no stone throwing, no Molotov cocktail bottles being thrown. Levels of crime and terror attacks have dropped dramatically for two major reasons. One is the vast majority of the Arabs are locked in their houses in complete shock. Shock of what happened in the south by the attack. They couldn't imagine that somebody would actually succeed or carry out such an attack, and shocked by the response of the Israeli army. And therefore, they're literally locked in their houses because they're trying to avoid any contact, any friction, and they're just staying put, hoping that this tornado will go past them, and then they'll be able to go back to their normal life. As time goes by, they realize that something different is happening. I'm with them, I would say, on a daily basis, contact or phone calls. Usually they're the ones who initiate it. As a father of 6 kids, who 5 of them are in the front line at the moment, I don't feel I have too much to say to them. There's definitely been a breach of trust. You have to remember that some of the people who were killed in the attack on the 7th of October were actually peace activists, people who had very good relationship with Arabs in Gaza, people who helped them jump the queues in treatments for hospital, for medical attendance. They employed them, and they were surprised to find out that the attackers in their house were the same ones that they actually had a relationship with. It puts a very big question of trust in the future. And when I hear President Biden talking about a 2-state solution, I tend to think that he's not quite connected to the reality of what's happening here. Even the Israelis who were in support of a 2-state solution, even those who were in good relationship with people in Gaza, are saying now that they will go back to their houses in the kibbutzim bordering the Gaza Strip in one condition, that Gaza won't be there anymore. That's not the vision that President Biden has of a 2-state solution, and I don't think he realizes how many years have we gone back in the potential of reaching any compromise, whether you believed it, supported it, agreed with it. At the moment, it seems like we've shifted quite far back in time in that response.
So I want to actually touch on that, which you just mentioned. You were once tagged as the international spokesperson for Judea and Samaria, and I believe the Prime Minister actually asked you to do that, and you were traveling around and you were doing quite a few speeches and lectures about that. So your sense of the diaspora community, certainly the American community, is keen. So what is your sense about what you're seeing beyond the White House? What's happening internationally, specifically in Western capitals and throughout the U.S. on campus, as to the response just a few weeks after the massacres of October 7th?
So I don't have a clear answer to that, and I'll tell you why. Yesterday, I was one of the mayors who was allowed to watch the movie that, if you can call it a movie, that the members of Knesset were exposed to last week. It's a 47-minute film of the horrific sights of what happened on the 7th of October. You need a tough stomach to see it, and you need medical care after you go out to it, seeing it, and it's not something pleasant to see. The person who showed it to us was the person who is in charge of Hasbara in the Prime Minister's office, and he said something which surprised me. He said, "We know what you see in protests, but the truth of the matter is when we go and count governments, when we go and count private individuals, there is a big support in the state of Israel, despite what you see on social media." Now, as I said, I don't have the numbers to analyze that. I see the pictures from campuses. I see leading universities like Harvard and Stanford not taking a stand and not stopping these protests. So I don't know where to finger point at that at the moment. They are discussing what to do with this video. They're showing it. Every Israeli ambassador in his country is actually going to show it to members of parliament or a House of Representatives where he is stationed. And it seems like they are planning to make it effective and influence the public's opinion. When we do see those clips coming from universities, coming from capitals around the world, and you see news agents interviewing the people who protest, where is Palestine? What is Palestine all about? And you understand that these people don't have a clear answer about what they're protesting about, it does raise a smile as you smiled at them, but it doesn't make us gain the support that we need to gain. And I think here, the line that Prime Minister Netanyahu took, but I don't think it's been emphasized enough and people realize it enough, that if Israel doesn't stop Hamas in the Middle East, these European countries will find themselves with this reality in capitals in Europe. It's something that looks far away. People don't realize it. People don't feel it as a threat so close by. I think in Europe, it's settling in more than what it is settling in the United States. But I think that is the approach that we need to try and take. And definitely when you see the protests, and if you add it to the horrific pictures of the attack of the 7th of October, I think we have enough materials to combat what we see and say, is what you're protesting in support of? If this is really the regime that you want to take power in Gaza, and maybe then we'll be more successful.
I want to bring our discussion back to Yudan and Shamron, back to Judea and Samaria, and perhaps Efrat specifically. My son is serving in the area south of Hebron, just south of Efrat. And one of the things that he and his team and his unit have done over the last couple of weeks is to round up Gazans who have crossed the fence on October 7th, October 8th, thousands upon thousands. I mean, there was one point where he said there were 800 of them all that showed up at a border crossing into Yudan Shamron, trying to get to their cousins, whether or not they were legitimate civilians trying to escape an oppressive regime of Hamas in Gaza, or whether they were participants in the massacres that occurred on October 7th and 8th. What is the sense of what's happening over there with respect to thousands of Gazans who have walked across Israel and are now trying to get into Yudan Shamron?
So I don't think it's a pattern which is happening at the moment, because the border has been quite sealed up. The presence of military representatives there is very heavy, and it's very hard to cross the border at the moment. It is definitely true that in the past, there were many people from Gaza who tried to cross over to Judea and Samaria to Israel, because this is the water well in the region. Not just literally that we have water and they don't have water, but this is where you can find work. This is where you can earn more than what you earn in the Gaza Strip. And there were definitely attempts throughout the past. I know of figures of definitely thousands. I was quoted 4,000, and today somebody said to me, Oded, that's way lower than what the actual number is. The army has rounded them up, has tried to take them back to Gaza during the last weekend. Surprisingly enough, an operation that went quite smoothly and quietly without creating any headlines. but the IDF managed to take back to Gaza thousands of Arabs from Gaza who were in this region. I would take this question as an opportunity to emphasize on another problem that we have in Israel, which is building up, which at the moment nobody is really addressing. As far as the average Israeli is concerned, if we are allowed to generalize, generally speaking, but at a time like this, I allow myself to generalize, the average Israeli at the moment, when he sees an Arab, he doesn't care if this is an Arab who has Israeli citizenship, if this is an Arab who comes from Judea and Samaria, or if this is an Arab who comes from Gaza, or if he is a member of Hamas. All four categories fall under the same headline. He is a suspected Hamas terrorist. I say that by exploring the calls that we get into our emergency headquarters of people who see an Israeli telephone technician who works in Cellcom, and he comes to treat a house that has a failure in their telephone system. He is allowed to come into Efrat because he's an Israeli citizen. I get calls that we need to come and arrest him because he might be a member of Hamas from Gaza. That's the level of fear at the moment. It is quite a big challenge how this will be treated with. I can say to you that one of the outcomes at the moment, at least in our educational system, the biggest threat to our educational system at the moment is hygiene. Because in the past, all the cleaners were Arabs. At the moment, parents don't want to see Arabs coming into the schools. I don't have anybody to come and clean the school. It is easy to say, so get Jewish labor. I don't know who are the participants here, if they're fathers or mothers, but I think the average Jewish mother wouldn't like to see her kid being a cleaner in a school. We have other dreams of what we want our youth to grow up into. And there's a shortage of manpower in those specific aspects. But any of you who visited Israel in the last few years and needed to go into a chemist, you might have realized that most of the chemists in Israel are Arabs. If you need a treatment in a hospital, quite a lot of the personnel in hospital are Arabs. Surgeons are Arabs. And putting all that into the pot which is on fire at the moment, it's causing reactions, causing issues that we need to attend and deal with.
So speaking of reactions to that very issue, many of the citizens in Yehuda and Sharon, in Judea and Samaria, are armed, and they carry their own weapons and their own sidearms. And in addition to that, we've had those who have carried out what we call tag machir, or price tag events in Judea and Samaria. Are we concerned about that? Are we seeing a rise in that? Are we just in general, because of that situation, because of the level of fear, how are we approaching those?
So you've touched two different issues, which I would like to address both of them. Number one, the amount of weapons. So when the first few days after the attack happened, I spoke with a general in the army, and he said, Dad, have you got enough rifles in your city? So I said, that's a weird question. What do you mean have I got enough rifles? I've got 60 rifles. As far as I'm concerned, I would like to have 4 times the amount because I'm preparing myself to an attack like we saw in Gaza. 50 rifles is not enough for the long stretch of the city, which is Efrat, 5 kilometers from one end to another. So he says to me, what, you have 60 rifles? You know how many rifles they have in Afula? I said, no, I don't know how many rifles they have in Afula. So he says to me, they have 0. So obviously, the Israeli government now had to make sure that in Afula they have rifles, and only then they will get to Efrat. So there wasn't any enforcement of more rifles besides those who came as reservist soldiers. But if I know that every month I issue 4 to 5 certificates of proof of residency in Efrat, those certificates are used in order to go and buy handguns. So I know that more or less every month, between 4 to 5 residents of Efrat buy a handgun. Since the 7th of October, we're just over a month, I've issued 1,000 certificates of proof of residency. It means that the amount of rifles which are being bought is way out of proportion as to what we're used to in the past. It's an indication of lack of a sense of security and how people want to take, won't say the law into their own hands, but definitely the protection into their own hands. Having so many guns can be good, can provide security in case of an emergency, because we know at the end of the day that not every day there is an emergency risk. There's also risk in having so many weapons in a society like we live in. These weapons can be stolen very easily, and then they get into the wrong hands. These weapons can, God forbid, be used in domestic violence issues. These weapons can cause accidents of friendly fire. These weapons can cause accidents of people actually pressing the trigger by mistake and injuring somebody else. So it is another issue that we are concerned about and definitely worried about. The issue of price tag, it's, I would say, surprising that you have raised it, Adam. We're literally bombarded by news agencies coming to interview all the mayors in Judea and Samaria. What is the story with price tag? How many incidents have you got? What are you doing against it? How many Palestinians have been killed? And just to explain to you how outrageous this campaign is, yesterday I had a reporter from the Netherlands, and he said to me, according to this and this source, during the last month, 128 Palestinians have been killed by settlers and armed forces in Judea and Samaria. So I said, whoa, even within your own quote, you're misleading, because I know the figure of 128 people that were killed in Judea and Samaria. None of them were killed by civilians. They were all killed by soldiers in action trying to prevent terrorist attacks. So you see that even within the framing of the question, they tried to frame the answer that they wanted to get. So I put him in his place. I know from other mayors that they're also being bombarded by these journalists. And when we hear President Biden saying that this is a major concern of what's happening with the Hilltop youth, it's taking things out of proportion. I'm not saying that there is no violence. I'm not saying that this violence is legitimate. I am saying that when there are incidents of violence, they need to be treated by the army, by the police, but it's definitely completely out of proportionate. It's literally name tagging anybody who lives over the green line as if we're all going and looking for Palestinians to shoot them. That's not the reality, and it's just another to-do item on the to-do list.
So with the short time that we have left, I really only have one or two more questions. You mentioned early on that we were supposed to have municipal elections now throughout the country, and those have been pushed off until January. And you mentioned that there are factions within these elections who are, I guess, using the conflict and using what's happening right now to their own advantage politically. And that sounds strange to me now, because it seems at the very least that there is political achdut, there is political unity, at least right now during this moment. I do expect that to completely fall apart the day after, but at least right now there seems to be achdut, and it sounds a little bit strange to me that on the municipal level that's not the case.
So as I said, I just finished a meeting with the Ministry of Defense. So one of the participants said to him, nobody envies you sitting on your chair at the moment. So he immediately responded, don't be so sure. I can name you quite a long list of people who would be willing to replace me now. Okay? So there is a slight difference between what you see and what you preserve as unity and what's actually happening on the ground. Now, obviously, people are not that stupid. Okay? I gave you my analysis, but and it's been reported in one of the national newspapers today that they basically went through a whole list of cities, not just in Judea and Samaria, how heads of opposition are coming with initiatives. Now, these are legitimate initiatives. There's a group of residents that doesn't feel safe. We want more volunteers in a security team to protect the city. they actually do roadblocks. They walk around with vests. On the surface level of it, it looks like completely genuine and legitimate that there's a group of volunteers who want to enhance the security of that specific city. When you think about it further in and you understand what's happening, it's another indication of lack of trust, which the lack of trust was breached on the 7th of October. There's lack of trust in the government. There's lack of trust in the IDF because of the horrific success of the attack of the terrorists on the 7th of October. The mayors at the moment are perceived, even though I don't have any security forces, I'm subject to the army, but I'm perceived as a member of the government. I'm the long hand of the government. So there's a WhatsApp group with one of the rabbis that I'm handling at the moment that he says his community doesn't feel safe and that the council is not doing enough to provide security for the residents. And it's an ongoing dialogue. And like I say to him, look, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he says to me, but my residents say this is not enough. Now, it's an endless list. Whatever I will do, it won't be enough. And that's where it finds us in this time of a campaign, which is definitely challenging.
So the last question is a question that it's hard to answer, I think, and that is the question about the day after. It's hard to even think about the day after at this point when we're so immersed in it, although I did see that the Prime Minister did say today that Gaza will be under some kind of security control of the IDF, of Israel, for the time being, immediately the day after. But that's in Gaza. In Yudan, Shomron, and Judea and Samaria, like you said before, those communities are surrounded by Arab towns, villages, cities, so on and so forth. How does the day after look like in Judea and Samaria?
So before we jump to the day after, let's talk about the day today. In the meeting with the Minister of Defense, there were definitely suggestions of actions to do now during the time of war, things which can provide better security for the cities and the towns in Judea and Samaria. Breaking through some connecting routes between Elazar and Neve Daniel, where you live, making these places more protected. Having some sort of safe zone surrounding the city. Demolishing illegal buildings in Area C that we've been asking for quite a few times. The question wasn't answered. I would say to you that the impression I get from the government is that they're so flattered and overwhelmed with the support that they're receiving from the American administration that they won't try and do anything that they might think is going to jeopardize that support at the moment. For example, there's such a chaotic situation. Why not go and publish tenders for 10,000 new units in Judea and Samaria? Can go underneath the radar. People won't notice it. They won't do it because that will cause maybe friction with the American administration. They don't want to risk it at the moment. So that is what's happening at the moment. And from there, we jump to what's happening in the future. If they're not doing it now and taking advantage of the situation, I doubt if we're going to find ourselves in any different situation in the future. And here I have to put one remark. That is as long as the leaders of this country carry on thinking in the same way that they're thinking at the moment. I.e., carry on investing in more and more defense, protecting more and more, and not really thinking how can we eliminate threats and how can we push them further away. The discussion today with the Minister of Defense was how the towns are going to have more response units to protect them. And as I said, fences create a sense of security, they don't provide security. Even if I would have a permanent military force in Efrat of 50 soldiers, which is 50 more than what I have on a regular basis, so that it will just raise the level of threat of somebody who wants to overcome it, and they will challenge it and they will attack when it's convenient for them. I can't yet say that I've witnessed a change in thought. The fact that they're hitting Gaza hard that is an outcome of the severity of the attack that happened on the 7th of October. Everybody's extremely impressed of how the army is actually managing the maneuvers there, and how accurate they're working, and how sophisticated intelligence they have, and the cooperation between the Air Force and the tank units and the paratroops, and everybody's working in combination. We have to be honest. They're not really being confronted by enemy who is alive. From time to time, terrorists come out from tunnels, they shoot, then there might be casualties. But it's not that it's an army fighting another army, and you see these maneuvers against an enemy that you see. They are conquering, they know where the Hamas leaders are, they're bombing them, but there isn't yet a change, even if what Prime Minister Netanyahu said today, I don't see it working that easily. Don't forget, President Biden is expecting a two-state solution. Prime Minister Netanyahu is offering him a one-state solution. They will have to meet somewhere in middle ground, and I don't see that changing with a different perspective as to how we're managing the conflict.
First of all, you've given us quite a bit of your time this evening. I know that you actually had a meeting that started about 14 minutes ago, and so I appreciate you taking the extra time to be with us here this evening. And any final thoughts before we let you run off to your next meeting?
First of all, as usual, it's good to know that we have loyal friends back in the United States. Seeing the pictures of what Jewish communities are going through in the diaspora is definitely worrying. I understand that it strengthens the sense of unity between Israel and the diaspora. I hope that this unity will carry on also after the day that we'll be able to put our weapons down and carry on building our country. I have my doubts, but it is a good reminder of what the potential is. And it's a good reminder of putting things in the right perspective and the list of priorities. And sometimes we tend to have bitter struggles and arguments and conflicts over what seems at the moment completely minor and irrelevant issues. So let's use this moment as a reminder. I hope that from this we'll just grow stronger, more united, and hope to see you all here in Israel, in Efrat, rather sooner than later. So let me know when you're coming, and I'll free my schedule to host you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Oded. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And again, I encourage everyone to go to aflikud.org to see the project that we are working on right now in order to protect IDF soldiers. Thank you, Oded. And everyone should stay safe. Thank you.